Right, let's return to that story around the interest rate hike. Consumers have already been feeling the pinch of soaring living costs. So today's repo rate hike will not be welcome news. How do we navigate this rough economic seas? Let's discuss this further with developmental economist Phelisa Nkomo. Good evening and thank you for coming through. I understand that it was courtesy to Andrew Derrida and company that you are here. Otherwise, we would have been talking through a screen.
No,
but nevertheless, thanks for coming through. It seems to me that the Reserve Bank, the Monetary Policy Committee and the governor are, for lack of a better word, hell-bent on curbing inflation, whatever it takes. Do you read the interest rate of 75 basis point, two of them back-to-back, 6 in total in terms of rises since November last year? Do you also read it that way?
Well, I mean, I'm reading that way that they want to cap it. But obviously, this is at the behest of the fact that, firstly, one, we have a very vulnerable economy. That's the first issue. But also, I do think that, in fact, they could have done better than what they've done today. Because, in essence, you can't have an economy that is growing at less than 2% and where you overburden with the interest rate for a number of reasons. Firstly, there's an inverse relationship between private investment, business, but as well as consumer spending. So in essence, you and I today know that we're going to get those SMS WhatsApp from all our different banks saying we have just increased, you know, your either your bonded home or any form of credit that you have. And obviously, the implication is that you have to buckle up, and buckle up, obviously, at the expense of the economy. For a number of things. Firstly, you're not going to be able to spend again as a consumer. Consumers are not going to be spending. But also those who want to take credit, either to expand their businesses or even start new businesses, will not be able to. Now, this is happening at the time where actually you do need an economy that's truly working. There's something they've also highlighted in their statement, which they were talking about public sector that is actually weak in as far as spending. And it is a misnomer, by the way, and I think fundamentally it reflects poor macroeconomic coordination. Because in essence, when you have a crisis, for example, of inflation, and I'm just going to stick on the, targeting inflation of 6%, and I'll speak about other things later. Under normal circumstances, when you are confronted with that and you have a target of 6% and the central bank believes that they need to cap it, you need a state that is going to spend to make it sure that it insulates the economy, right? Because at the heart of, by the way, of inflation increases, or even on the interest rate increases, is to support the supply side of the economy. And the demand of the economy is actually choking, right? So the state needs to kind of like neutralize that situation and make it sure that it spends. And when the state is not spending in terms of its own capital formation, in this context, infrastructure program, and make it sure that there's a circulation of money in the economy. Young people are working, black women are working, poor communities, there's money going on, in essence. So in essence, people don't really feel the pressure of interest rate, but people would feel the pressure of interest rate because already it's actually taking off the purchasing power that in fact was actually not existing in any case. So
is it your sense then that the governor and the MPC, all these variables that you mentioned, they believe these are not within our powers? This is fiscal policy. We can only do what we can with monetary policy, and from where we sit, we look at inflation and see it as, we look at the weaker economic performance, etc., and even the risk of a recession, of plunging the economy into a recession. We view it as the lesser of the two evils, because when inflation is high, it's mostly the poor that suffer.
That's always the general argument. In fact, that's true. When we talk about, increase of general prices, obviously, every consumer gets affected, both the poor and everyone else. But the key question for me you must always ask is, so when the monetary policy leg, right, is choking the economy, who is supposed to be providing safety net to the economy? It's the fiscal policy. And in economics, we call that macroeconomics broadly, right? But fundamentally, when the monetary policy size consistently chokes the economy, it's an indication of poor coordination. It means that the fiscal policy, in fact, is absolutely doing zero. And what has actually been happening, though, as well, is the fact that the fiscal policy has really been only focusing at social security, right, as the only measure to actually relieve the pressure. And that intervention is actually very minimal. It's not only not sustainability in terms of from a fiscal stand perspective, but also what it does is that it just, creates intergenerational poverty amongst those who have access to employment. So the key question, though, it's whether, because if, for instance, the central bank feels that part of managing inflation is to actually increase interest rate. So the key question is actually, is the inflation targeting a sufficient tool to be able to manage inflation in this country? Central banks across the world actually now have increased their mandates, not only to inflation targeting, only as South Africa does, into dual or multiple stacks. So, for instance, US has just increased their interest rate by 25 basis points. And we've decided, as a developing economy with so much high unemployment and young people who are completely out of work, with 75 basis points. So meaning that families who would have been supporting those who are poor, in poor families, that's what's happening, particularly in black families, are likely going to actually being choked more, but also having to support a lot more people, because businesses are not going to be creating jobs when in fact they are actually confronted with high interest rate in terms of their credit.
Not to ask you to engage in crystal ball gazing, but what's your sense of when and how far we are likely to see this upward cycle? How far is it likely to go? And in that mix, what becomes of the South African consumer? Because as we go to bed, you rightly say, we will be receiving those notifications that tell you by how much your repayments on your loans have gone up. It's hundreds of rand, thousands of rand for those with higher debts. That has just left your wallet, your
Absolutely.
pocket.
There are a number of things, and it's true there's a component where it can be controlled because of the Ukraine-Russian issue, right? But interestingly, we've seen actually a decline in terms of food prices. Cereal, oil, wheat, for instance, they've actually declined. So we shouldn't be confronted with inflation. So we must ask, what are the drivers of? Because, if you read the statement, it's so vague, it's all over, by the way, right? And also, even the central bank is actually saying we are predicting that our growth projections are actually going to be lower. The key issue actually that we need to deal with in this country is that we need to actually build industrial capacity of South Africa, because the lesser dependence from other economies, right, actually builds a resilient economy, and that you don't expose your economy into external shocks all the time. It's true when you are a globally integrated economy, whenever a global economy sneezes, you also get affected. But in our case, we actually get more affected, right, even though we're such a highly industrialized country, because part of it is that our industrial capacity is actually quite small, and that we've actually become such an importing country on almost everything, right, from consumer goods to wheat, for example, to oil, to all food products. So in essence, what the fiscal policy needs to do, it must support industrial policy. Currently, our industrial policy, by the way, is only receiving less than 10% of GDP, while social policy is actually getting more than 60%. So can you see the misnomer? It means that, in fact, we're creating a society where South African citizens must rely on social security than actually working. And in that way, there are so many South Africans who actually want to work because they feel that it's restorative to have access to income in their own, which gets determined by them, instead of social security that gets determined by government.
So impossible to tell at this moment.
Absolutely.
When we might start to see the easing of this current.
No, absolutely. But also there are also political choices that the central bank needs to make, and it made actually this time around a difficult choice against the consumers.
All right. Thank you for that. Phelisa Nkomo, developmental economist, weighing in on today's decision by the Monetary Policy Committee of the South African Reserve Bank.